Yes. Perfect. So welcome. My name is Chuck Black. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Midwest Regional Manager. We have several members of the voter-friendly campus team on this call. So if y'all can say your names.
I can go first. Hi everybody, my name is Rachel Clay. I'm the Southeast Regional Manager at Campus Vote Project. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I basically am in charge of helping do and supervise the work that happens in Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. So if you are in any of those states or you know anybody in those states and you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Hello, folks. My name is Rahila Ahmed. I'm the Deputy Director of Campus Vote Project. Happy to be here with y'all tonight.
Hey, I'm Mike Burns, he, him, the Director of the Election Center's Campus Vote Project.
Jill, are you on?
I am. I'm Jill Dunlap. I'm the Senior Director for Research Policy and Civic Engagement and get to partner with the fun folks here on the Voter Friendly Campus Initiative.
Awesome. So we're super excited for our guest speaker. But before we welcome him, we do want to just provide a few updates. Many of your campuses have already submitted your statement, which is the first part to becoming a voter-friendly campus. If your campus has not done that, please go ahead and try to submit that as soon as possible. And then you're going to hear a bunch about writing your campus action plans for voter-friendly campus. They are due May 31st. So those are just some basic updates, and we'll talk more about that after our guest speaker. So it is with great honor and excitement we welcome Dr. Adam. He is part of the wonderful team at Tufts that puts NSLVE together. So I'm going to just pass it to him, and he will also be sharing his screen.
Thanks so much, Chuck. And thanks for having me, everybody, today. I am going to share my slides here, and if someone can just shout out that once I start the slideshow that you're getting the full view and not the presenter view, because I'm working with two screens today.
We see the presenter view.
Okay. And now?
Perfect.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, so thanks for having me here today. We're going to talk a little bit about NSLVE, which is sort of our flagship project at the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education. We'll get into a little bit of how to read your report. We'll look at a sample report, and then some kind of recommendations for action to set you up on your way. Apologies if you've heard a lot of this before. Mike Burns, looking at you in particular. I see someone like you on here and I'm like, oh, he's heard this spiel from me before, but okay. So as Chuck said, I am Director of Impact at the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education. We are an applied research center at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life, which is the one of a kind a college for civic life. We're located at Tufts University, which is just north of Boston. So in our office, we study all things political on campuses. Anything you can imagine kind of at that intersection of democracy and US higher education is an area of concern to us. We have different things that we emphasize at different moments, but these are a sampling of some of the topics that we look at. So of course, voting is kind of the thing that most people know us for, but we study campus climate for political learning, which I'll get into in a little bit. political equity, discourse, and even things like classroom teaching. And right now we're in the midst of a project looking at threats to democracy and higher ed's role in it. So for us, one of the things that we sometimes will get not necessarily pushback, but like questions on is the word democracy in our name. As you may feel yourself, or maybe you've heard, the concept of democracy itself has, for good reason, come under some level of scrutiny, especially recently. For us, when we refer to that term, and when I will refer to it today, it's thinking about the concept of democracy as an aspirational goal for us, right? So it's not necessarily the system we have 100% in place right now, but it's one that's participatory, equitable, and representational, in which the populace is educated and informed, and people have equal access to quality public education, and effectively governed. Of course, this may seem a little bit like a dream world, but these are the goals that we have in mind when we're thinking about how we shape democracy and the role of colleges and universities in the US. So NSLVE, which hopefully all of you have heard of before, but if not, it's the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement. We consider it to be higher ed's objective measure of college student civic engagement. When the study was founded, it was actually founded as part of Circle, if you've ever heard of them. They're kind of a peer office at Tisch College. So this started as a voting study that blossomed and took off, and it became clear that we needed to kind of spin it off. So the Office of IDHE basically formed around NSLVE, and now NSLVE, like I said, is one of the marquee projects that we have. So for NSLVE, we have data that go back to 2012, and so for every even election year, we have data put out. And last fall, we put out a national report on the 2020 election and 1,200 or so campus reports, which hopefully all of you have if you work at a college campus. We also view it as a database for research. We have almost exactly 1,200 institutions in the study now, and really the number is now close to 11 million college student records for each election year, and all 50 states are represented in the study, and DC. So how does NSLVE work? So if you're at a college or university, chances are your campus already provides enrollment data for your students to the National Student Clearinghouse, which is a large nonprofit. The National Student Clearinghouse provides like all sorts of measures nationally and for your campus back based on the data that your campus shares. What NSLVE does is we pair that data with public voter records using a vendor called L2. And then we do adjustments using IPEDS data, which is sort of national data on student enrollment. And what we then do is, with the help of the clearinghouse and a complicated set of contracts, we're able to have the clearinghouse will sort of anonymize your record. So we never get any single individual student's record. We don't know how people are registered, party affiliation wise or anything like that, but we're able to get an anonymized data set that we then can produce back to you as the campus reports that you know and hopefully love. But for us, since we have so many schools participating and so many students, we also put out national and sometimes regional reports and data so that you get a look contextually at kind of what's happening trend-wise. So just to kind of set like a look at kind of nationally what we're talking about here. So in the last midterm election in 2018, we saw 99% of our campuses saw rate increases from 2014 to 2018. So 2014 was kind of a low point. It was under 20% voting rate for students. At a time when, this stuff wasn't really measured very well or very much, even though there was a lot of rhetoric around campuses preparing students for civil society or however your school says it. There wasn't really a way of measuring this. So we view NSLVE as an imperfect but pretty good proxy for measuring student civic participation nationally. So 2014 was kind of a wake-up call to campuses. When you look at the 18 to 21-year-old student rate, it was even lower. It was around more like 13% turnout for students. So in 2018, the rate more than doubled to around 40%. And so you see here, this is a distribution of how much campuses increased. So you see at the bottom here, this is 12 to 15 percentage points, 15 to 18, 18 to 21, et cetera. So campuses really were in that like kind of upper teens, low 20s increase, which was just incredible. In 2020, it was kind of a similar story. The rates really jumped again. So a little over 50% in 2016 was a student voting rate, and then it jumped to 66% in 2020. Kind of unbelievable and almost in line with the actual national voting rates across the board, which is unprecedented for the years with which we have data. Students generally are seen as kind of voting in lower numbers than the national public. You may be familiar with this. We'll talk about this in a second with your campus reports, but we not only provide the national student voting rate, which is just kind of out of all eligible students, how many of them voted. We also provide you with the registration rate. So nationally it was 83%, which was a bump up from 76%. And the number that we are particularly interested in is the yield rate. So that's of those students that registered, how many of them actually showed up to vote, whether by mail or in person. 4 and 5 students, so 80% was the national student yield rate in 2020, which was down at 69% in 2016. So a lot of schools, they'll do registration drives and things like that, but there's still kind of efforts going on about how do we get students to show up to vote after they've been registered, because it's not always a simple, easy process to get there. Since I showed you the 2018 chart, here's the 2020 chart. 97% of campuses in NSLVE saw an increase in rate from 2016 to 2020. And right here is the dividing line. 13 campuses went down, and the most they went down was 3 percentage points from 2016 to 2020. Or sorry, this was greater than. So just right here, left of this line is schools that went down, and then all of these ones to the right are campuses that increased. So from over half of students had voted in 2016, and yet still in 2020, many schools saw a 6 percentage point increase all the way up till 20 or so percentage points. Okay, so if you're at a campus that participates in NSLVE, you get a campus report. This past year, we redesigned the reports a little bit with a few things in mind. One, that these are mostly digital documents, so that allowed us a little bit more leeway in terms of our graphic design for it. We tried to make them a little bit more colorful, a little bit more readable, and the main driver of this was accessibility. We had gotten not a lot. I mean, really like 1 or 2 campuses had asked about screen readers and things like that, and so we made a lot of efforts in this to make this a more accessible version of this document for folks out there. But we also wanted this to be a little bit more readable and less of a kind of like data nerds only document. We wanted this to be something that people can share and anyone can just kind of pick up on campus and flip through to have a sense of what's happening at their school. So in the reports, when you read it, one thing I would note is, as usual, we provide pretty much all the same measures that we've given you on the old reports that you may be more familiar with. But we also provide national benchmark data for all 3 types of metrics between the years. You can compare the change at the national and change at the campus level more easily in this design. And you see here these little wedges here, these benchmark diamonds, we call them. On the chart, these give you kind of the national numbers. You can see how your school did compared with the national numbers. We also provide a looking closer pages on pretty much all of the areas. this is where you get the raw data. So you can see like the numbers that derive. I'll pull up a sample report in a moment that you can take a better look at. But this is a way for you to kind of see the actual numbers and how we get to the percentages, so that you can see. So you can see, you can share this with your registrar or with your institutional research office to say, are these lined up? You can kind of check the data yourself. And this is how we sometimes will find, like, if a school is underreporting or over-reporting numbers, whether by incident or whatever, that the schools, we can kind of help work with them to improve their data quality. And that helps because the data that's being reported is to the clearinghouse. So there's all sorts of measures coming back, not just NSLVE. Across the NSLVE report, we provide breakdowns in various areas. Here's a look at the new race and ethnicity page that we include in the campus report. It's, I think, on page 7 of most reports. We've enabled campuses to be able to recognize various different trends using this. You can see the change in voting rate between the 2 years that's compared. And you'll see here, so 2016 to 2020, that's a comparable election because it's presidential years. And as we get more and more years in the NSLVE database, we'll be able to provide more and more context for your data. So once we have 2022 data, you'll be able to look at 14, 18, and 2022. So you'll have 3 comparison years for that, much like 2016 to 2020 and so forth. We can compare the presidential years. Over on the sidebar, you see there's some arrows, and they'll show you kind of the general trends. But to look at an actual report, so this is a sample campus report. First page, you see our team on Zoom. We've been remote since March 2020 for the most part, in and out of the office when possible. In it, you get a little bit of a breakdown. You get the top line numbers, yes, and then of course the looking closer pages where you get the raw numbers, like I said, and the arrows will indicate if you're up or down in each category. One thing I want to point out, so we provide these breakdowns in all these different areas.
I'm sorry, Adam.
Oh, yeah.
This is Kristen from CVP. Something changed on the slide. Am I the only one who's only seeing like a column of a?
No, that was the same.
Okay, 1 second. Let me fix this. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to sit, like, kind of as a personal point of interest. Definitely don't stop reading at the top line page. I know that the tendency sometimes can be like, we get this report, how did we do? What's the overall number? What's the bottom line? And sometimes that can be this top line voting rate, right? The 64%, and that's kind of the flashy headline number. But we give you all these different areas, including race and ethnicity when it's reported by the campus, voting method, if it's reported, age group, by sex, to the extent that it's reported in the data that we have, and then education level, class year, enrollment status, field of study. The reason that we provide all of these areas is so that you can look for gaps in participation. So we always say it's not about how many people voted, it's also about who voted, because then you can kind of ask the question of, not only, so like looking at past elections, what are the trends on campus? Are our students all participating in equal numbers? And you can ask some critical questions of yourself in practice to say, how does this reflect on the work that we're doing? Which may be the case sometimes, not always. It sort of depends on the circumstances of your particular institution. But you want to think about who's being left behind, and then where you can make future efforts to do outreach. So in our national reports where we summarize the data, we've made some concerted efforts the last 2 cycles to feature campuses and some innovative work that's being done. In the 2018 national report, one of the schools that we featured is the University of Texas at Austin. And one of the reasons we chose to put that is they had a really compelling story about how they did their outreach on campus. And what they did was they did a lot of targeting of areas of study that were lagging behind. So on many campuses, that's different areas of STEM fields and business. So what they would do is they would reach out to instructors, ask if they could have some time in class. They told us sometimes it was 5 seconds that they would get, or like that they would be allowed to like hand out a flyer. And in some classes, it was a significant chunk of time that they would get. And they really wanted to think about like, okay, you know, in the political science classroom, we know that some of these things are being talked about, issues of public relevance. But is it happening in the mathematics classroom? In some places, yes, and in some cases, no. So I definitely encourage you to kind of look through these reports. And for each area, like I said, you can see percentage points, you can see the change in percentage points, and then you can see the raw numbers on your campus. So it's really interesting to look at these individually. One thing I'll note, the sample campus that we have here, this is kind of underreported. That's why it's a little bit more sparse. But one caveat always is it's important to look at the raw numbers just to make sure that you're not inferring, you know, a huge jump or huge drop when like the numbers are small that you're dividing between. So if you have a campus, like let's say, so I worked at Florida State University for years in student affairs. In a school that's of 40,000, if a major had 96 students in it, that would be a pretty small size, or like 52 students. So in that case, if 5 students change, that can provide like a huge change in the percent. So it's important to look at both, like the top line percentages, but then also the raw numbers. In the back of the report, you can find out a little bit more about the data and about our office, and you'd find some resources and some recommendations from us in there as well. So back to the slideshow. Chuck, can you just confirm that you're on the presentation here?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, so you get these reports, then what, right? So on our website, you'll find all sorts of resources, each of which I'm happy to share in the chat after the presentation. But we definitely encourage you to use these reports early and often. So some schools will use their NSLVE report. We have presidents and other senior leaders on campus that will use it as kind of like a kickoff document to talk about, you know, we have an election coming up. Here's what this looked like last year on campus or the last election. It's a great way to start discussions. Sometimes like a campus coalition that does this work might use this work, might use their NSLVE data as a starting point. We also encourage you to lean on our election imperative series, which are a set of recommendations that are based off of the NSLVE data. And I'll briefly mention those in a moment. Make sure that these reports are disseminated, that people have access to them, that they know that they're out there. If you have a website that is around your, you know, a civic engagement center or potentially just a voting initiative on campus, we encourage you to, it's up to you to decide if you want to do it or not, but we certainly encourage campuses to publicly post their reports so others can access it easily. In our election imperative series, you'll learn more about this, but we encourage you to have a coalition responsible for thinking not just about voting, but about thinking about political participation and political learning generally. This is about building a culture of political learning on campus and a campus climate that's not only friendly to, but encourages political learning. Think about connecting voting with other issues of discourse, inclusion, agency, leadership. Training students in the art of political discussion is very important. with a focus on inclusion. We always say that to people, who want to bring in external experts, you often have some really great talent on your campus. So definitely don't look beyond campus to begin with. Like I mentioned, display the data, identify and focus on students with low voting rates, share the reports with faculty if that's kind of the position that you're in, across diverse student groups, train faculty as well in the discussion-based teaching. And you can think about things, we've seen schools where they generate a report card. I know some of the national nonprofits help campuses to evaluate their efforts and think about how they're doing. And of course, if you want, you can always reach out to us. We're always happy to hop on Zoom or on the phone, or in some cases even come to campus. We also do climate studies for schools that are really interested in digging in at what's happening. I just want to make a quick note. So when we sent out the reports in the fall, it's a sort of a technical issue, but we had to send them out as an HTML link. I apologize. I'm sure it was a little bit of a pain for some of you. We're going to send those out again as PDFs. So stay tuned. We're just going to reissue them because I know some of the HTML links have expired. So if you have questions about that, that's on the way. So I mentioned that we're not just NSLVE and that the NSLVE data informs some of the other recommendations that we offer. So we, for years, going back to about 2014, have looked at the national trends in NSLVE data and said, okay, for all of these schools, there are some that are exceeding expectations and some that are below expectations. And that's based off of a national regression analysis of what you'd expect based on national trends and who's on that campus. And we would visit these schools and say like, okay, for this school where it's above, like well above expectations, and even visited some schools below expectations, what's missing from those schools. So the trends that we see, the 5 major themes that emerged of schools that were highly politically engaged, there was a sense of social cohesion and shared responsibility. So students felt cared for by the institution and by others, and they felt a sense of responsibility for the university's well-being and for the well-being of their peers. Diversity and equity were a realized part of practice and sort of spoken about and understood in practice as what made the institution excellent, not just as kind of a thing that was spoken to. Pervasive political discussions were the most prevalent theme across all the data. So I mentioned like in political science classrooms, maybe you'd expect that discussions were happening, but at some of these schools, in the math class, they would talk about gerrymandering, and in the engineering classroom, they talk about infrastructure and bridges and roads and like which communities were underserved and which were being taken care of regularly through budgeting and processes and things like that. Student activism and leadership. This can be kind of a sensitive one for campus administrators. Again, I formerly as one saw this firsthand at moments. Activism is something that sometimes you'll see managed away, or the sense of, well, the student's going to graduate in a year or two, like, let's just kind of wait them out and like put up structural barriers. At the schools that we visited that had high levels of political engagement, activism and leadership among students around like social issues were seen as educationally important and actually like part of what the university or college was doing. And lastly, we saw at these schools that there was a buzz around elections. I've been saying lately, it's maybe a little hard to imagine based on the last couple of elections, but there was a little bit of a fun atmosphere around it instead of just a sense of existential dread, which many of you possibly felt at some other elections. So we put that out. It's called Politics 365, the 5 themes. But what we heard a lot of was, okay, these are great, but how do I do this at my school? How do I turn this theory or these kind of themes into action? And so we put out a report called Election Imperatives that It's 10 areas of recommendations. And on each page is sort of an explanation of what that recommendation looks like in practice, and then specific links to resources and ways to kind of make it happen at your institution. And they range from like very lofty things that we know are difficult to implement, especially on certain schools, to things that are very simple and can be done like later that day. So it's put out there in a sense for you to think about your own institutional context and think about what is possible and what you want to do. In 2020, we were thinking about what we wanted to do for that election, and we realized that what we wanted to do is put out a companion piece to Election Imperatives. So we put out Election Imperatives 2020. For better or for worse, some of the primary themes of this still hold true today. And if you pull it, these are all free up on our website. In this report, you get the context for 2020 and beyond, it seems, a checklist for equitable practice, and then we put out recommendations by area. So if you're a senior leader, there's a couple of pages for you to check out in specific faculty academic affairs, and then of course, student-centered organizations and staff. And that includes a lot of the nonprofits and national organizations that we work with. Something to think about for all folks like doing this space, as you think about your NSLVE data, as you think about how do we turn this into action on campus, we recommend this. This is at the start of the Election Imperatives 2020 document for a reason, because we think all people doing this work, whether you're in the faculty area or student-centered staff, should do these things as part of your work. So check in with students and your team and see how people are doing. A sincere check-in with people goes a long way. Think about long-term interventions and ways of embedding this work on campus. Ask questions that are critical of yourself in there. Who's missing from the room? How can we make this a more accessible space? Think about decision-making on campus, the power dynamics in the room, and make sure that there are multiple avenues to involvement. It's not just about, we have this one meeting and this is really the only way to participate. You kind of think about this in a creative way. Like I said, if you want to pull down the report, I don't want to go over my time here, but we have recommendations for different areas, including student-centered teams. And then in the original Election Imperatives guide, you'll see recommendations like this: talk politics across campus. It's all about involving faculty and in thinking about co-curricular spaces like clubs for where you can get some of this work done. And lastly, empowering students. One of the themes that we had seen in Politics 365, like I said, was about students having a sense of shared responsibility for the campus. And we would hear similar quotes across multiple campuses of things like, if there's any sort of decision that needs to be made that affects the lives of students here, we will make space at the committee meetings for students. They'll help drive the decision. We ask for input at every turn. And that was part of how the work was done at those schools. If you go to idhe.tufts.edu, we have a ton of resources up there. Like I said, I'll drop a couple in the chat once I am done babbling on. And if you want to read more about the national numbers, we have Democracy Counts 2020 up on our website, as well as Democracy Counts 2018, if you want to read about the last midterm. And if you're interested in kind of following the news stories that we are reading and or learn about the resources as they come out, our Twitter is really the first place that we put that stuff. It's at TuftsIDHE on Twitter. We have a mailing list, and if for some reason your school is not in NSLVE, definitely check it out on our website. If you have questions, if you email idhe@tufts.edu, it goes to Yui Tren, who's the person who kind of monitors that account. But we are a small team at IDHE. We're really 5 people at the moment. So she kind of will direct it out to whoever is best person to field the question. So we'll stop my share there. If there's any questions, happy to answer.
Wonderful presentation. Are there any questions before we move on?
Hi, Adam. I have a quick question, and I'm not sure if this is the right space for it, but if our institution does not aggregate data by race and gender, do you know where we can start that conversation on our campus to get that data?
You said if it's absent the race and ethnicity?
Yes.
If you want to send an email to idhe@tufts.edu, we can get you like a more full description for this. But thank you for raising that. I'll say it's usually a question of between the registrar's office and it's usually the registrar's office, I would say, is the place to go. But the institutional research office sometimes is another place that you might want to reach out to. But we can get you some more information on that. Happy to send you like a more full description. We also have like a full FAQ up on our website that may help with some of those things.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. I see Steve has his hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that IDHE is interested in threats to democracy. Could you say more? Was that something we could find on your website, and if so, where?
I would recommend, we have a report that our founding director, Nancy Thomas, wrote called Democracy by Design. And then we have Democracy by Design Revisited in 2018 that kind of looks at that document. I will drop that. I will add that to my list here of things to drop that I'll put in the chat for you to check out. But the Threats to Democracy project that we're doing is currently being written by myself and others. It's part of a Lumina grant funded project. So we'll be probably presenting on that, hopefully, maybe this summer at conferences. But otherwise, we'll definitely be sharing it out through our mailing list and through Twitter. But we're currently negotiating some of the ordering of it and the phrasing of some of the things, but it's in the works right now.
Thank you. I'm very, very interested in that. If there's anything you would like us to help with, please let me know.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions?
I'll just say in the chat, I see Kyra said, I can't see the whole document you're sharing. I will, again, share these in the chat. Naomi, same thing. I'll drop in the chat the checklist that I sent out. That's in Election Imperatives 2020. It's like the 3rd or 4th page of it. And yes, the PDFs, it's imminently coming out, but we're working out some of just the technical details at the moment, but it should be soon.
Hi, Adam. I have one last question. If we're going to be reading the election imperatives, do you recommend reading the 2020 version, even though we're moving into a new election, going back to read the older one, both?
Yeah, so you'll notice on the like original election imperatives, it's titled Election Imperatives 2.0. So we had originally written a version of that for the 2018 election season, and we updated it to be a little bit more evergreen, and we updated some of the resources in there. But we wrote that one to be kind of, this is a long-term document that can be revisited and used over and over again. Election Imperatives 2020 was really written with the idea that this pandemic will end soon, and that that hopefully like will make major strides in terms of racial justice and some of the results in activism that's happening around it. Like I said, for better or for worse, on like we get into kind of like point by point on it. A lot of what we wrote in that we feel very strongly is still holds to this day. So I would recommend both documents and kind of looking at them as companion pieces. The plan is for Election Imperatives to have another release this year, but again, that's another work that's in progress at the moment.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? This was awesome, Adam.
Thank you very much. I'll stick around. I'm going to drop some stuff in the chat, and then if anyone wants to message me anything else, I'll also put my email address in the chat too. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to our Southwest Regional Manager, who's going to talk about how some of our campuses will use their report. So take it away, Rachel.
Thanks, Chuck. I'm not in the Southwest, but we CVP are in the Southwest, and I'm happy to see so many people from all across the country in here. I just did a big perusal, and we're covering a lot of different regions, so I'm really happy to see that. I don't have a huge amount of, no, you're perfect. I just wanted to make sure that people knew, but I don't have a lot to add to what Adam said, which I was very much predicting that you would be very thorough and there would be quite a lot. So I'll try not to avoid redundancy. I think the real message I wanted to share was that, like, the usefulness of NSLVE really comes in how we want to make what our limited resources are more effective. I think that all campuses have an issue of resource limitation, though it looks different from one campus to the next. I think that sometimes it can be staff, sometimes it can be money, sometimes it can just be as simple as time. And what NSLVE allows us to do is use our resources more effectively. So what I do when I work with campuses, and I think almost everybody, when I looked at this, other than California, which it's, even if we don't have a state coordinator in your state, you can always reach out to somebody to give you hands-on support, and we will find time and find a person to help you. But if anybody on here wants to ever have a one-on-one sit down with the person that is their state coordinator to go over their report and come up with action items that come from it, that's something that I really love to do. One of the biggest things I try to do is just go through the report and see, what have you done a really good job on? Let's compare that with your action plan and make sure that we keep doing that. And then where's there room to grow? So for instance, when we look at a lot of plans, there's a big distinction between registration and turnout. And a lot of campuses are doing really tremendously with turnout. So their GOTV efforts are really quite robust, but maybe their registration efforts weren't. And so we have an overall voting rate that's lower, and it's due to not people not showing up that are registered, but not registering people. If we had more people registered and they all showed out to vote using the GOTV efforts, we would have a much higher voter registration rate. So whereas sometimes there's a flip side where we have a low voting rate because we have a ton of people registered, they're not going out to vote. So what is happening in between those times? And we can look at those numbers and see what are you excelling at, and where can we use our resources more effectively. I think the other big piece, and this is where campuses institutional knowledge is so paramount, is the actual physical layout of campuses is really tremendously apparent from NSLVE reports, from my experience at least. When I look at how a lot of fields of study, there's distinctions between fields of study and where people will put flyers up, or where people will table, or where people will put their efforts towards. It can be as simple as having tabling efforts, flyer efforts, class efforts being done on a building that maybe was being ignored. I worked with a school in Virginia, and they had it was a community college, and they had just kind of accidentally ignored an entire building on their campus because it only housed one major, but that major had a lot of students in it. And so we looked at their NSLVE report, and that was the lowest turnout for their field of study. And we just, basically they added 2 days a week of like registering and doing voter engagement efforts by tabling in that building when they hadn't before. And it had the highest increase the next year for their NSLVE report. Like, it actually truly was that immediate. So it really, you can look at your physical layout of campus. I think the other thing that is, and I'm glad that we talked about this, is like a lot of schools don't know that they're not reporting their race data to the student clearinghouse. And I've, through NSLVE, discovered that with a lot of schools. So that can be quite important as well. And then I think the other thing that I find very, very helpful is to look at the method of voting on an NSLVE report. I had a lot of campuses in North Carolina that were working to advocate to get election day to be a holiday for students, which is quite a big effort. And for a lot of those schools, when we looked at their NSLVE reports, because we have early voting and same day registration in North Carolina, students really weren't voting on election day. Maybe it's because it's not a holiday, but I think early voting is more convenient, and we try to encourage people actually to vote early instead of waiting for election day, just in case they have some registration issues. And they learned that like overwhelmingly more of their students were using early voting. So you can look at your campus and you can see the method by which students are voting, and maybe you can either try to make sure that people know how to use the other ones. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge for how to do absentee voting or how to vote early or things like that. Or you can look at how people tend to vote, and you can sort of tunnel your resources into that to make sure that people that are already doing that are doing it right. They know what they're doing. You're pushing that out on campus. But that's really, I think those are some of the more helpful parts, but I mean, Adam really covered a lot of this. I would encourage anyone on here that is connected with CVP, if they want to set aside time with their state coordinator or me. Like, I don't work directly in any state besides Tennessee and South Carolina really, but I am very invested in NSLVE personally. I would really encourage like setting up a one-on-one to just go over a report. And especially as we're like getting into the voter friendly campus program and people are writing their action plans, it is tremendously effective to have that NSLVE report while you write your campus plan. So you know where the gaps are, so you're not continuing to add resources where you maybe don't need to. And you're also making sure that you're retunneling those resources where they need to go. It's really just a tremendous tool for effective use of what is very limited, unfortunately. And we may not be able to change that limitation, but we can definitely try to be more thoughtful. So thanks for letting me share that with everyone. If there are any direct questions, I'm happy to answer them. But that I think I'll be repeating a lot of what Adam had to say if I keep going with anything that I have planned. So I won't put anybody through that.
All right, thank you. I'm going to pass it to Mike Burns for any final thoughts and to take questions.
Yeah, just some quick programming notes too. And if folks have questions, feel free to come off mute or raise your hand or just drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. But as we mentioned before, I think we shared the link for the statement of interest in the chat again, as well as also on the Voter Friendly Campus website. You can find a lot of our previous resources and materials, not just for NSLVE, but especially for action planning. There's sample campus plans on there from previous years, recordings of all the webinars from 2020 and 2021 that we've done for the VFC program. And we will put this recording up on there as well and continue to add each month with our monthly recordings, as well as the other materials that are up on that site now. So just wanted to flag that and make sure that folks knew that that'll all be up on there. Yeah, but happy to see if there are any questions or great ideas, interesting ways that folks have used their NSLVE data themselves that folks want to share. Maybe while things are thinking about that, I will share one of my like mild pet peeves, and also like behaviorally informed insights for NSLVE data, is that from a messaging standpoint, obviously as CVP, we're focused in a lot of states where there are a lot of barriers to registration and voting, especially on the election administration side, and want to help folks be able to understand and overcome those. But I think when we talk to young people, students, folks who are newer to the process, we don't want to lead off with the problems. We want voting to seem inclusive and achievable and that other folks are doing it. So I see sometimes folks will get their NSLVE data and want to do more of like a shame-based message of only so many people are registered or only so many people vote. And I would say just generally think in your communications, at least, about flipping that narrative and talking about the number of people that are already participating on campus and making that be inclusive, using language that refers to folks as voters and gives them agency in that, as opposed to starting from a negative standpoint. It is just sort of like a little bit of a an ongoing issue that we've been working to address in our own materials for years now. So I thought I'd share that tidbit with folks as you think about ways to present that in a more public facing way. I think like Adam and Rachel shared, really asking some hard critical questions, looking to see at your specific campus, even regardless of national trends, but like at your campus, who are the specific groups that are potentially underrepresented either in registration or turnout, so that you can try and go and meet them where they're at on campus to understand what those issues are that are holding them back. Really important. But then when we're doing more general, more public presentations, really trying to, like I said, make it inclusive.
There was a question in the chat about who their state contacts are, so we can drop our staff contact page.
Yeah, I also love this comment shared by Haley. This is, I think, a phenomenal tactic, and we've seen it be really successful at a number of places. To one, like have folks who are both trusted communicators from those groups, then be at the table and understanding what's going on, and then also helping identify and maybe lift up what some of the specific barriers might be with those student populations as well. So really great stuff around trying to have these robust coalitions with different folks from different parts of campus and representing different groups.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, we want to thank all of you for coming. We hope to see all of you at our March webinar, and stay tuned for future information. And as always, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.